Hey there, my name is Simon Owens, and I'm a tech and media journalist. And here with me, I have Renan Borelli. Renan, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am the Senior Director of Audience Development for MTV News, where we help with all the distribution and strategy and all sorts of different things for all the great digital things that are being created at MTV and MTV News, and I'm a former colleague of yours as well.
Great. So the reason I had you on is because we both wanted to talk about Medium and specifically whether it's real, like if it is what it originally set out to be and whether it's kind of lost its way. It seems to be kind of struggling to find its place within the marketplace. So I'd love to maybe start a little bit just talking about its original premise, what originally drew me to it. And I've been a long-term user of Medium. And what I thought was so brilliant about Medium from the very beginning was that it basically took the network effects that you find on like Twitter, Facebook, and other social media accounts and applied it to long form writing. So it used to be that if you wanted to blog, if you wanted to write kind of more like something that was more than a few hundred characters, that you basically had to use your own WordPress site or blog, which if you were something like the New York Times or some kind of blog that was publishing 20 pieces of content a day was fine. But if you were someone who was maybe publishing once a week or once every several months, it was just almost virtually impossible to really drive traffic and point traffic to that site and get it. And what was great about Medium is it was kind of this centralized place where there was an already existing audience. And not only that, but just like Twitter and Facebook, if you created really good content, you were rewarded by that because you could start a massive following, so that when you published the next article, it was a little bit less difficult to get an audience for it because you were growing a following on it. So I started using it in earnest, I think somewhere around 2014, cross-posting some of my blog posts. I'd publish something to simonowens.net, but then I would also publish it to Medium. And it wouldn't happen with every single piece, but every couple of pieces, something would really take off and it would get shared by influential people and amass several thousand views. Is that what's your experience been with Medium? And do you kind of agree that that was the main value proposition, that we were finally getting something like Twitter, but for something over 140 characters?
Yeah, I think like early on, I was fascinated by the idea, like the name in itself, like it's a home for medium form content, Twitter is for short form, and then there's long form stuff on like established websites, and then Medium would be that in between space. I didn't necessarily think of it as an option for myself for a while. I think like Medium was mostly known for a while as being the place where people did, personal essays or like, hot takes or, make public announcements. Like there was a trend of politicians and, corporate executives sort of bypassing PR and making statements directly on Medium. Like I remember it was a big deal. I think like maybe Obama published his State of the Union or something on Medium, like before before his speech, and it was like a big deal. And then my interest sort of peaked when they started bringing in publishers to actually, establish their presences on Medium. And that's like sort of when I started to buy into the concept a little more, in that like the idea, as you mentioned, of like a network effect on this site, with the compilation of, really established like publishers and great content. It was something that I believed in and I was interested in, and a lot of their early partners, including like The Ringer and The All and Think Progress and Film School Rejects, there were sites that I read regularly, and I was like, oh, I can foresee this possibly being a thing in terms of there actually being a social network devoted to like writing that I'm interested in. And I think like around the same time this was happening, Facebook was making its like significant pivot to video. And so Facebook was becoming a hub for, it became clear that it wasn't the best place for sharing articles that were, contributing to the discourse. It was a lot of lists and, inspirational videos, and it started to decrease, I think, in value for me. And, suddenly so many publishers that I liked were on Medium, and I was like, okay, there might be something here. And, on top of that, like, it's just so easy to set up, a site there. Like I wanted to do it for MTV News because, we had like a pretty significant editorial pivot at the beginning of last year where our content, like, we started to publish more features and more reviews and different types of analysis. And, we had pretty much been strictly Facebook focused all this time, and Facebook rewards like crazy headlines and I don't want to say clickbait, but it's more like shorter, sort of easily digestible things. But like when you have a 2,000-word essay breaking down like a serious topic, Facebook's not always the best place to put that stuff. Particularly, it's not very clicky. Like thinky, complicated pieces are not like don't really make a big impact on Facebook. And I was like, well, maybe if we put some of this stuff on Medium, which is like a platform where people are used to reading longer or medium like length content, like we can actually build a readership sort of off of our website and off of Facebook, which drives the bulk of the traffic to our website, and we can maybe benefit from the network effect of Medium. And it was something that I was really interested in doing, and we still publish. We syndicate some of our content to Medium, but after the changes for the last couple months, like everything sort of changed a little bit. So yeah, I had high hopes for the initial vision, and now I'm not really sure where it's headed.
Yeah. So before they started inviting on publications that had their own domains, basically they had launched their own publications and they had their own freelance budget, and they were basically running as an editorial shop. So they had Matter as a publication, they had Back Channel, and then they had launched a bunch of other ones. Like there was some women-focused one, and then they were basically giving them editorial budgets to work with, which I thought was really brilliant because it kind of by having established writers on the platform right away, then it created an audience that was landing on these pages constantly. So then once you're already on there, then you can go and create an account. It kind of solved that problem that a lot of social networks have, is it's not worth being on the network until other users are on the network. But then when there's no other users on the network, then what's the point of getting on it? Whereas here they had influencers on it right away, which I thought was fascinating. Yeah. So and then they basically made it so it was a CMS that you could put on your own domain. So you saw as you mentioned, like publications like The Ringer, Pacific Standard, Think Progress go on it, and I thought it was really cool, and I think it possibly was a good way of getting more people on the platform, and also allowing these publications that have a network effect. The one downside though is that they really started kind of amping up the feed to where it was more algorithmic, and I think since they were really trying to push these publications hard, I think as someone who was a writer on Medium who was cross-posting all his content on it, I saw a noticeable dip in my reach and the virality of my own posts. And I noticed that every single time I went on medium.com on the homepage, it was giving favor to these publications, even if they're like for instance, Think Progress was one of the publications, and I would log onto the Medium feed, and it would be showing me a 10-day-old piece of content from Think Progress. And I'm just like, so my content's getting crowded out by like really old content just because it's coming from this publication that you're partnering with. And it also just started, like, the whole point of a social network is that you're supposed to be able to curate your own feed and who you follow, but it started trying to guess what kind of content that I wanted to read, even if I didn't actually follow those accounts and it wasn't shared by that account. So it made it even harder for me to kind of reconcile as a writer on Medium. Like, I've spent all this time, I've amassed like 6,000 followers on this platform, but how many of those followers are actually seeing my content, and how much of is it getting crowded out by these publications? And so I wonder if there's kind of like always a natural, and this happens across Facebook, Twitter, first it starts out with the, early adopted user base, and I would consider myself an early adopter for Medium, but then they try to play nice with big brands and big publications and stuff like that, and you always hear about users getting kind of crowded out. I don't know, like, what do you think about that dynamic, if maybe they went too far to the other side and focused too much on the brands and the publications and not enough on the users?
I don't know. I feel like I sort of come at it from the opposite angle, right? Because like what drew me to Medium was the fact that all these publishers were occupying the same space, right? And like while I'm a big fan of your work and your writing, I would say a lot of the other stuff that came from independent writers may not have been something that I was particularly interested in or wanted to read. I wanted to keep up with Think Progress and The Ringer, and it's a tough balance. And like Facebook, very notably last year, shifted their algorithm to like deprioritize news content and prioritize content from your family and your friends, and it caused a lot of uproar at the time, because publishers are like, well, we've been investing so much and this like hurts like our livelihood. Most publishers rely on Facebook for like a good chunk of their traffic now, and giving more space to your family and friends, like that has implications for these publishers. And like I get the value behind both ideas, that like Medium should be a place for independent publishers as well as established publishers, but finding the balance between the two and getting your algorithm to a place where it's smart in predicting what you want to read, but also sort of like not watering it down to just like crazy think piece headlines or shitty content, because like ultimately Medium wants to be a place for intelligent content. That I think earlier on, Medium, maybe middle of last year, they said that they were going to start prioritizing even shorter form content. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of Medium's problems are just tied to the product actually itself. Like while the publishing platform is really simple and efficient and like much easier to understand than like if you started your own WordPress blog. It was a little more complicated than Tumblr, but a little bit or a lot easier than something WordPress focused. But the actual front end of the site, the homepage, and the way you discover content on the platform, they're trying to be minimalist, and they give up a lot of real estate. The recirculation's not great. Like in trying to chase this minimalist aesthetic, I think it ran into a lot of problems with like their homepage was really never a destination. I would come into Medium through side doors, but I would never go to the Medium homepage or the app for discovery. And they never really got it to a place where you use that main Medium homepage or app the way you would use Facebook or Twitter, where it's like the front door for everything. That's how everybody consumes their content. And they've recently tweaked their homepage. I don't know if it's for the better. I would argue probably that it's not. But part of the trouble is just that front door. That homepage was never a destination for me.
Yeah, their homepage redesign, I think, was just completely terrible, and it's going towards that thing where what I was talking about, whereas they're de-emphasizing the social network aspect of it, whereas like now the homepage is just a few headlines at the very top from people that you actually follow, and then almost immediately it switches to them just trying to predict what kind of content that you want based on these very broad topics like media or politics or something like that. Like I would consider myself a political junkie, but I follow very specific people on politics. Mm-hmm. I don't follow Wolf Blitzer on Twitter, but I'll follow very specific political writers that Nate Cohn at the New York Times. People that I really admire, and I think just trying to go that broad categorization route has just been terrible. And by the way, if you haven't already, you can revert back to the old homepage, which I did. I'm probably a little bit more of a homepage reader than you are, just because I'm a frequent writer on Medium. I cross-post all my content there, so I'm usually coming in through the front page, and I'll take a few minutes to kind of scroll through and look through content. So yeah, we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves with that, but yeah, so I think it was cool with the publications. I was never a regular reader of Grantland, but I became a regular reader of The Ringer just because I was logging into Medium pretty often, and even though I don't really care about sports, like their pop culture, tech, and media reporting is top notch. So I'm kind of sad that they're going to be leaving Medium, because I feel like I'm going to maybe I'll have to go and sign up for their newsletters or something, because I think just by following them on Twitter, I'm going to see as much stuff So yeah, they brought on these publications, and then they launched this or began to launch this advertising network, which I think was the natural way to go, especially with any social network, is bring on kind of native advertising, allow a brand to establish a presence on Medium, create their own publication or account, and then pay to have their content that they're creating on it natively inserted or recommended within the feed or on the recommended things. And they started building that up, and they kind of did something kind of neat and innovative that no other social network that I know of has done. Is they actually identified power users on the platform and emailed them and were like, hey, we're launching this. Would you want to be someone that we could recommend as a writer to these brands that are coming on? So I got one of those emails. I didn't really participate because I couldn't really take on any more clients at the time. So it was really kind of neat, and they were starting to build that up. And then they just suddenly, January 4th of this year, laid off 50 people and just completely shut down that entire operation before it was really going up, and announced that they were going to do kind of like a subscription platform, which I think was just incredibly premature. And he was talking about how they weren't solving the problems with advertising. I disagree. Like they weren't doing display advertising. They weren't doing the kind of clickbait encourages publications to just create content for content's sake. It was going to be a cleaner function. It was going to be closer to something that we see with BuzzFeed and other native advertising. I don't know. What do you think? Like, do you think it was premature for them to just cut and run from that so quickly?
I think there's, the tough part about working in digital media is that there's an argument for both sides, right? Like when Ev made his statement sort of announcing their pivot away from display advertising and native ads, I read what he wrote and I was like, you know what? Like, it sort of makes sense, right? Like I sort of agree that display advertising and banner ads like may not be the future of digital media. And it may be very valid that like the future of, sustainable publications on the internet is going to be subscriptions,
But they were never going to do display advertising. Like it was only going to be purely native ads.
The sponsor thing. But like, in his argument, he was like, this is not a sustainable business model and they're going to pivot, right? And so, like you've got several examples from big publishers like the New York Times to, non-media like services like your Netflixes and Spotify that rely on paid subscription models. And then, you've got your independent publishers like Ben Thompson at Stratechery or Nick Qua at HotPod, where, the subscription model is like literally what's keeping them afloat. So like in theory, I understand that, but I agree with you. Like it's sort of a necessary evil, like, trying to advertise in that way. And like, it seems premature to me to just like abandon that entire model when it's still holding up like a lot of the internet, and had so much room to grow. And it's like there were lots of things that they could have done from a product perspective to try to make these more valuable ads for sponsors to chase and to, increase the overall readership or the people coming in to the site. And they never really made any massive changes to the way that the site looked until after the pivot. And there wasn't much like experimentations with like the way that they surface ads. Like maybe it's because they didn't have enough people and they just couldn't amass enough like page views to make these native ads profitable. But I still feel like the ultimate idea and the concept like still had legs, and to just abandon it so quickly and to announce this pivot to a subscriber model where there's nothing really behind it yet, like the $5 a month to pay on Medium, like doesn't really get you anything significant. And they're not at the point yet where like you can subscribe to Ben Thompson at Stratechery through Medium. So they're really just not doing anything, which is, I don't know, it's sort of difficult for me to wrap my head around, because they went from trying something to like really not trying anything. And whenever this rolls out, like, I mean, people already have the knives out, but like, it would have been nice if they had whatever the next thing was ready at the time they announced a pivot, and they've just been in stasis for months as publishers flee the platform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess to play devil's advocate, even though I think they were too premature to leave it, I know like re-educating advertisers is a huge challenge to start trying something on a new platform. One thing I think of is Reddit. Reddit has this massive, a pretty big user base and a pretty massive audience overall, but they still are struggling from an advertising standpoint. And part of that is that advertisers just don't even think of it in terms of a strategy to pursue to buy advertising on Reddit, even though I'm sure they have a pretty good advertising and targeting platform. And because it's just like another, it's just another thing that they have to learn and everything like that. So I'm wondering if Ev just got really frustrated with just trying to re-educate advertisers and just build this entire platform from this advertising platform from scratch. And rather than just sticking it out, just decided to, and go for this subscription thing. So to talk about the $5 subscription, so, talking to people at Medium behind the scenes, how it was originally explained to me, and I think this is something they're still pursuing, and what I think would have been the smarter route was giving the users a way to offer premium content behind a subscription wall, something very similar to like a Patreon, so that you're kind of democratizing subscriptions. So you give users the kind of tools to build an audience on the platform, and then say, hey, if you want some extra premium content, here's this paywall. And they actually started beta testing, I think, something like that with some of their publications, I think maybe Film School Rejects or something. And then imagine my surprise then when instead of doing that and rolling out that tool to all users, they instead launched this like $5 a month subscription that's more like a Netflix model. And I guess full disclosure, I've been commissioned and wrote an article that will appear behind this paywall shortly. So I'm getting paid by them to do this. But it just seemed like the wrong strategy. Because nobody's loyal to Medium as a overall platform. They're loyal to the original, the individual artists and content creators on the site. So why not just roll that tool out to everyone and allow, one thing I haven't officially announced it yet and won't until July, but I'm going to be launching my own subscription product soon. And I'm going to be launching it using it right now. It looks like Patreon is what I'm going to be using. And that's how I'm going to be collecting payments and email addresses and sending it by email. But if Medium had rolled out something like a subscription product like that I could use, I would have considered that as my platform to try to build off of. I don't know. I just think that would have been a much smarter route than trying to create this massive thing that will supposedly appear to everybody. Because they are. I disagree with you that they're not offering stuff. There are like long form articles and stuff that are behind the paywall, so you're getting access to premium content. But there's going to be all sorts of it's going to be hard to really appeal to individual niches and stuff like that. You're going to have to create basically broad-based content, and I think that's a lot harder to do.
Well, and going back to the original ad model, I could totally see Ev getting frustrated with the direction that it's heading, because if you want those high page views to make ads or native content worth it, you sort of have to make the content worse, right? You have to water down the overall product so that you have something more clickable and that more people want to read. And lighter and sort of less quality, the way Facebook has become, to really, get the numbers to where you need them to be. And if his vision for this is higher quality content, that would make sense to me. I think what also makes sense to me is this idea that, not to bring up Ben Thompson at Stratechery again, but he's he talks a lot about how bundling and unbundling are basically the best ways to make money, right? And so if you liken the New York Times and the subscription I pay for the New York Times to HBO Go or Netflix, that is a product that is good enough for me to pay for, and maybe the Washington Post, but I'm not going to subscribe to many other news publications of that variety because I've got pretty much everything I need from the New York Times and the Washington Post. But I could see a world where if they had several premium publishers behind a paywall on Medium, and they bundled them together for me. And, you know, the only way I could read The Ringer and Film School Rejects and The All was some sort of subscription fee where I get all of them. Like, I could see that as well. And I could totally see the Patreon model, but it's like, it's sort of a different value proposition, because it means Medium is going to get weirder, you know, like if it's a place for individual publishers and not big publishers, then like you're talking nichier, the content is going to be more niche. It's going to be more sort of weirdos and individual voices, which is a good thing and could be, you know, an interesting thing. And there are like several people like yourself and Ben Thompson and Nick Quah that I would pay for, you know, content from, but I don't know how long that list is. You know what I mean? I do potentially see
Patreon is like. But the great thing with Patreon, and I spend a lot of time on the platform, is just amazing how niche and weird it can go. Like there are people who are like, you know, sex artists that are on Patreon. There are like really obscure niche podcasts and stuff like that. But together that scales a lot. So like Patreon, you know, it's a relatively new platform, much newer player than Kickstarter or Indiegogo. But they are now generating $100 million a year, I think, last time I heard, for creators. Now they're only getting 5 million of that. But scale that up, you know, let's say Medium took like a 5 to 10% fee and based on every through, and let's say they scaled it up to $1 billion a year, which, you know, something that the New York Times is going for in terms of their digital revenue. So if the New York Times could hit it, certainly a major Silicon Valley company like Medium could. Then they're generating, you know, $100 million a year. So $1 billion for their writers, and then they get 10% of that, so they're making $100 million a year. That wouldn't be bad. And then if you added, if they hadn't killed their advertising platform, you know, a few $100 million more with that, and then you have a company that's generating $300 to $500 million a year in revenue. I don't know, and I sincerely think I think based on talking to some people behind the scenes, that they are actually building this kind of product that where individual users can do it. It just seemed weird that now it's going to be competing with this main product that's like $5 a month. And I'm like a hardcore Medium user, and I was commissioned to write for this $5 a month product, and I still don't think I would consider subscribing to it, because I already subscribe to too much. Like I subscribe to the New York Times, I pay for the Washington Post, I subscribe to the New Yorker. And then I subscribe to a bunch of, like I use Patreon to subscribe to, you know, a few YouTube channels and podcasts, and then you know, the Hot Pod newsletter. I think I'm almost tapped out in terms of new subscriptions and the amount of content that I can read in a month, and I couldn't imagine adding this to the pile.
Yeah, and I think like the big question is about scale, right? Like, you know, it would be really impressive if they were able to scale it to $1 billion, but can you scale something that is inherently so niche-y and, you know, focus on individual voices to that scale? Like, are we talking about a company that, you know, is going to make 100 million off of that? Or are we talking that like, how big can they possibly get from that? And it's like, are you trying to set up something, you know, like a Patreon or a PayPal, where you're just like taking a cut of anything that comes through? Or are you really trying to build something that can be as big as Facebook or Twitter? And I know Twitter has its own issues, but if you're trying to go for a big platform like that, like scale is ultimately what they need to go for. And I don't know, those platforms are built off of people sharing constantly, and, you know, writing is sort of a higher barrier to entry. If you're going to write 500 words or 1,000 words, it's a higher barrier to entry for sharing. And I don't know how they can scale to a point that's so significant that they could make a ton of money off of it. That said, like, I think double dipping makes a ton of sense. Like, why not take, you know, have a subscription model where you can subscribe to authors individually or donate to authors individually and collect ads? Like, why not double dip and try to, you know, aspire to profitability as much as possible versus like abandoning the entire platform?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think going back to your point, you know, earlier about the publications going on, I think the way you scale, like, yeah, there's going to be niche publications, but if you can start luring regional daily newspapers, magazines, and stuff like that, and be like, hey, instead of you're due for a website redesign soon, rather than paying all this money to redesign your entire website and try to introduce this like metered paywall or whatever you're going to do, and then just have to 3 years later have to redesign your website again. Come onto our platform. We have the best engineers in Silicon Valley. You're always going to have the best of breed software, and we already have an advertising system in play, that you can start tapping into, both selling your own ads, but then also, tapping into our system, kind of like, I think you can do with Facebook Instant Articles, like Facebook will sell ads, but you can also sell your own ads. But also we already have like a best of breed subscription platform. So you're not having to build your own from scratch. And we have the network effects of all these publications on there. So we have like this huge user base. So you have an already existing audience. I don't know. I think that could scale pretty quickly to $1 billion in subscriptions. If you have, The Ringer, Think Progress, but then you also have, a couple major magazines that have decided to come over to it, and then a bunch of regional dailies or even small local weekly newspapers. Like, I think that could scale up pretty quickly.
Yeah, makes me think a lot about the app Texture, which is advertised on many a podcast. And I tried it out for a month or two, and I really liked it, right? Because Texture literally gives me, with like a $10 a month subscription, access to every magazine that I would want to read. Almost every single magazine that I would want to read is in Texture, and I instantly have subscriptions to each of them for $10 a month. And I've been going back and forth in my head about whether it's a great deal or a terrible deal, because like the access that it gives me is like unbelievable in terms of the publications and the amount of content at my disposal. But then it's like, hey, magazine subscriptions actually don't cost that much. And if you were like to just cherry pick and get a couple of the ones that you like, as well as, finding content that is being given away for free online, I don't know if $120 a year, or I can't remember if it's 10 or 15 a month. Like that actually sounds like a lot to support all those publications. And that's almost literally like a bundle of premium publications that are worth paying for. And I don't know how Texture is doing as a company, but like it's somewhat close. And I don't know. I still don't know whether Texture is worth it to me. And even if like Medium was able to replicate that, like I'm still not 100% sure whether it'd be something that, I would pay for. But, on your point about like their technology, which I think was a really strong selling point, because our website at MTV News is sort of hard to use, and the back end is pretty tough, and we don't have some of the technology that other companies have. And, the idea of being able to easily publish to Medium was something that was very attractive to me, just because of the ease of use, how easy it was to make a really good looking feature or story in Medium was attractive to me. And now that they've sort of moved away from that, and then you've got other people picking their pockets, like The Ringer left to, be the first non-Vox publisher on Vox's Chorus platform. And then you have the Washington Post with their like supercharged Jeff Bezos Amazon site that like runs really quickly and is really efficient and apparently is great. You've got them licensing their platform Arc to Tronc, and publishers across the country. And so I don't know, like, and, I've talked to people on the tech side here before that have sort of mentioned that, like, that's not an entirely new concept, like that, HuffPost tried to license their publishing platform to people in previous years. But, I think Vox's network of websites and the Washington Post are really, really good websites. And I'm sort of jealous that The Ringer will be able to use Vox's technology, which I hear is fantastic from the people that have worked at Vox and have come from there and talk about how great that platform is. And, a lot of people credit the big strides the Washington Post has made over the past year and a half to product, right? And how, how much they sped up their website and how well the site works on mobile and desktop and how fast it is. And that's been a big part of their, revitalization efforts. I mean, honestly, part of it is I think they've, heavily increased the output of the stuff that they put out on the site, which helps. But, I think they've been pretty public in saying that their publishing platform and their product has been a big part of their success for the last, year and a half since Bezos took over. And I don't know, if you're the Baltimore Sun, like, and you're part of Tronc, like, and it's working for the Washington Post, why wouldn't you go to the Washington Post now instead of Medium? They've sort of missed their window, I feel like.
Well, Medium doesn't just offer, Medium has the double whammy. It has both theoretically, it has both the platform best of breed software, but it also has the network effect. So I guess that would be the increased value proposition. So you mentioned that you guys were cross-posting some content, and I've noticed some other publications doing this. Speaking of the Washington Post, they're launching a publication on Medium called The Lily. And I know the New York Times, like whenever they write about their product stuff, that they launched a blog on Medium. What's the kind of value to an already established publication to cross-posting content to Medium?
I mean, I think it's a really good, it's a really good question, because I think each publisher has sort of a different value proposition. Like I know, so like the Washington Post Lily is like, they intend that to be just like a fully distributed sort of network of content. Like they want that stuff to go everywhere. BuzzFeed has curated like a couple collections on Medium where they like show off like their best work, or I think that the last one, they did one last year that was like, there's a collection of their summer long reads. For us, it was really about like the efforts to show people that we were a website that like published really interesting writing on pop culture, music, and politics. And people didn't necessarily always think of MTV News that way. So like as a person whose responsibility it was to put the work in front of as many people as possible, I would take any avenue to get people to consume the work, right? And try to figure out the best way to distribute our content, because yes, like Facebook comprises like the vast majority of traffic to our site, but I want to get way down the long tail of the way people discover stuff, so that we can actually put our stuff in front of a new audience, instead of like trying to jam everything through Facebook, where there's limitations in the way that you can present content and in terms of the audience you reach. Like putting something out on Facebook and Twitter talks to different audiences, and Medium as well. And so it was my hope that by putting some of our better stuff on Medium, that people would be like, oh, MTV News is actually pretty legit. I had no idea. I should go to their website, or I should learn more about them, or I should follow them. So for me, it was like largely about an awareness play. And for these other publishers, I'm not sure. Like the New York Times has been very clear that their main KPI is subscriptions, and that's the only thing that matters to them is subscriptions. But I think like in this sort of media state where Facebook, pretty much runs the entire sort of media business at the moment, I think people are very invested in trying to find alternate avenues to distribute and share their content that aren't just Facebook, because you don't you have to diversify beyond that core product, because they change things all the time. Who knows, in 6 months, it might be all video, right? And there might not be a place to distribute article focused content. And I was pretty invested in, where Medium was heading, because I thought it could be a place for the written word for text. As Facebook became more of a video-focused platform. So I was pretty bummed out when they pivoted, because I thought it would be a good place to put actual journalism. And it sort of frustrates me, like when people were poking fun at Medium's pivot and the struggles that they had, because like in theory, we should all be aligned behind this goal of like not letting Facebook sort of dominate the media industry and like control basically which sites succeed and which sites fail. Like a diversified sort of distribution plan is essential to keeping control of your publishing strategy and the way you talk to your readers.
And that's something I've done. Like whenever I publish a new article, I publish it to my own website, simonowens.net. I cross-post it to Medium, and then I also cross-post it to LinkedIn's native platform, which that's a whole other discussion we could have. But I've seen a lot of success because it increases the likelihood that my content will pop on at least one of those platforms. It struck me after I asked my question for you is that you have slightly different goals than probably the New York Times, and that your main platform is a television station. So it doesn't always have to. Not everything has to land on MTV.com if it's helping to promote the core product. So anyway, it's interesting. Like I agree with you. Like I want a more diversified ecosystem. I don't spend a lot of I spend a lot of time on Facebook as a user, but in terms of my own brand as a journalist, I don't spend a lot of time trying to grow my presence there, just because one, I don't think the kind of journalism I do is really good since I'm more of kind of like an industry tech person. I don't think that content does as well on Facebook. But two, like I when I was at U.S. News and World Report, I just hated always trying to second guess the algorithm and figuring out, or is it just a temporary glitch that's showing me the reach is down? I just like that I no longer have to worry about that stuff. And so I definitely celebrate more platforms out there that will allow people to diversify their audience, basically.
Exactly.
Well, anyway, those were all the questions I had. Thanks so much for joining me, and I really appreciate it. And it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was great talking to you as well. Talk to you soon.